So James, I understand about the different types of poles now, but looking at that tray there are an awful lot of rigging components and terminal tackle pieces. Can you start to make that clear to me?
Yeah, sure, Trev. What I wanted to do was just explain to you about some of the specific terminal tackle that we use when we're pole fishing. And the first thing I wanted to explain, we did touch on it a little bit, was about the different elastics that we use. Now, the different elastics are available in different strengths, as we discussed, different colours, but also different materials are used. And you've basically got two different types of elastic. You've got a hollow elastic, like this one, and a solid elastic, like this one. Now, they both have different attributes. Softer elastics and thinner elastics, typically we'll use a solid elastic like this one. Okay, and these are available down from a size 1 right through up to a size 20 for the heaviest. And as you can see in this case, the actual the elastic rating is mentioned clearly on the packaging, so that's a 6. Then the hollow elastics tend to be a bit heavier, certainly thicker in diameter, and typically from a rating of 6, again up to about 20. But soft elastics are very useful, hollow elastics rather, are very useful because they're actually quite soft given the diameter and the strength. So you still get a nice soft action initially when you're catching smaller fish, but when you catch a bigger fish, the power increases quite quickly.
Okay.
So a little bit complicated, but I just wanted to explain the difference between a solid and a hollow elastic.
Okay, one of the things I perhaps would ask is, these thicker elastics, you're coming out through the top section of a pole. How does that change between the two? Do you use, say, these for power?
Yeah, no,
tops?
you're right, Trev, and it's all about the diameter of the tip of the pole. Obviously, you can't run a thick, hollow elastic like that through a narrow, thin tip.
Okay.
For one, it's going to be difficult to do, but two, the elastic's not going to work very effectively because the pole's going to bend more than the elastic's going to be able to come out. The friction on the inside of the wall is going to prevent the elastic from working properly.
Okay.
So that's why when I mentioned about the power tops, you've actually got quite a thick diameter bore on the pole to allow the hollow elastic or a thicker elastic to work efficiently.
Okay, so it's not just about balancing to the fish, the size of the fish and everything else, it's balancing the elastic to the pole,
Exactly.
making sure it all fits
Exactly.
together.
Now we're going to do a little section that explains how to elasticate a pole later, so we can go into a bit more detail then. But that's the fundamentals. You need to marry the absolute perfect diameter of pole to the elastic that you're using.
Okay, and I suppose you're going to tell me, I see there's an insert or something on the pole. You're going to tell me about that as well?
Sure, that's the next thing to talk about. Now that's actually a PTFE bush. So that's like a plastic smooth insert that's put in the top of the pole. Because the pole's made from carbon, obviously if you didn't have that, the carbon would damage the elastic very quickly, given the fact that the carbon wall is sharp and you know, you're going to basically damage the elastic very quickly.
And coming from my background, if you like, I've used PTFE in different engineering applications, so I know that it's got a very low coefficient of friction, which then fits in with the elastic coming through it very smoothly.
Absolutely, it helps to make the elastic work very efficiently and very smoothly, which is what you want to help preventing fish from being bumped off.
Yeah, okay.
So that's a really very key point. The next thing that we quickly want to show you is the pole bung. Because you've got the elastic running through the length of the top sections, you obviously have to stop it in some way, and that's where we use what we call a bung. And as you can see, the bung has got an internal thread. Others have got a hook system where you can have the bung far enough up the pole to allow you to insert the section up it. Okay. Obviously, if you had the bung flush with the end of the pole, you couldn't fit the next section in. So that's why the bung has to sit further up, away from the area where the male section goes into the top.
Okay, yeah.
And you'll notice as well that there's on these bungs, there's actually a winder here, which is very useful because that means that you can adjust the tension of the elastic. And that's something we haven't really talked about. We've talked about the strength, but the tension of the elastic is also a very important consideration. So if you wanted to increase the tension on the elastic, you can actually use that winder on the base to achieve that.
Okay, so you would then be starting with perhaps more tension on the elastic, so you've got more power there almost?
Exactly, yeah. So you can adjust the elastic to the conditions that you're faced with and the rigs that you're using.
Yeah.
So that's quite a neat and important feature to think about.
And hopefully the fish that you're catching as well, or size of.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that pretty much basically covers the actual elastication of the pole. Next thing I want to talk about is pole floats. Now, as with all fishing styles, there's a multitude of different floats available, and fishermen being fishermen love to collect different floats.
I love to collect floats.
And it's the same with pole fishing. I mean, these just shows the range and style of different floats that we'll use when we're pole fishing. That's a large bodied float that you'd use on a river that's flowing, quite a strong deep river, and that's an interesting type of float. That's a flat float, again, that you'd use on a strong fast flowing river. So they're not going to be used today, but I just thought it'd be interesting to show you the variety of different styles of floats available.
Okay, so I see that this one's very flat.
Yeah.
Is that so you can hold it back in the current?
Exactly, so that you can present the bait near the bottom on a powerful river and ease the float very nicely through. So that's quite a specific style of float for using on running water. The other consideration to think about when talking about pole floats is the material used for the pole float stem and the pole float tip. This float is using a carbon stem and a hollow plastic bristle. Okay? Another style of float would use a wire stem, and in this case you've got a solid cane tip. And these floats here are what we call dibbers, so they haven't even got a tip. So there's different styles of floats to be used in different conditions and for different baits. And today, when we're fishing on a lake such as this, I think we can pretty much narrow it down to this slim style of body with a carbon stem and a hollow tip, and the dibber style of float. I think these are going to be the two styles of floats that we're going to be using today, and we can talk about those in a bit more detail when we get set up in the pen.
Yeah, because I was just going to say to you the different tips. Obviously this one's got more resistance than this one, and this is a slim one. So
yeah, that's right, and that's absolutely right. The tips that you use on the float are depended on by the conditions, but also the fish that you're fishing for and the baits that you're using. If you're using a heavier bait, like a big pellet or sweet corn or meat, you need a float with more buoyancy in the tip. Yeah. Okay. If you're using a more delicate bait like maggots or pinkies or small pellets, you want a much thinner diameter tip, which is going to be more sensitive. Yeah. The other thing to think about is the length of the float. If you're fishing in a shallow peg, you don't want to be using a great big long float. You need to balance the float length and capacity to the depth of water that you're fishing. And that's something I didn't mention as well. Most pole floats will actually have the capacity, that's the weight capacity, written on the float, so you can see. So you've got, in this case, these are using 4 times 8, which is actually 4 times 8 shot. Okay. Okay. And other floats, like this one, will use the grams, the weight in grams that it takes to cock the float perfectly. So that's a 2-gram float. That big river float, an 8-gram float. So you can see that the capacity varies between the different floats. Okay, well I certainly understand the shot sizes like 8s and 10s and all the other sizes that you've got. Yeah. When you're looking at grams, are you still using shots, or are you using different types of weighting for those floats? Yeah, Trev. And that's where we've got another specific area when you're talking about pole fishing. Of course, many rigs will just use the same shot that you would do for typical float fishing. So you've got, in this case, number 8s and number 10s.
Okay.
So that's just a normal split shot that you use on the line to cock the float correctly. But we do also use what we call olivettes. And olivettes are weights that are specifically designed for pole fishing. Basically, it's like a bulk, but in a very streamlined and compact form. And in these cases, they're all non-toxic, because you can't use lead olivettes anymore. And basically, they're very useful to achieve a certain type of presentation. So where you want to have a bulk style presentation to get the bait down quickly, olivettes are a very nice and neat way of achieving that when you're pole fishing.
Okay, I can see that. So if you say got small fish on the top, but you know you've got bigger fish down below, and you want to get through those small fish, then fishing a rig with an olivette would be perhaps a good idea?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about keeping the rig neat, which in turn helps to improve presentation. You could use a lot of shot, but you might have to use quite a few, and that can be more prone to tangling.
I was just going to say that. So I'm prone to tangles.
So olivettes are a really specific weight used in pole fishing. Something else that has come on the scene is these weights that are called sticks, and they're a hybrid between a style, which people don't tend to use so much now, a style weight, and a shot. And they're very nice and very effective for use on thicker lines, like what you'll be using on a lake such as this. So we'll talk about that in a bit more detail, but essentially all you need when you're pole fishing is standard split shot, a selection of olivettes, and maybe something a bit more specific like these new sticks or style weights. Okay,
I understand that. I'm just looking. I see you've got some rigs already set up here, James.
Yeah, well, a good thing about pole fishing, because you haven't got to use a rod and a reel, is you can actually prepare the rigs before you go fishing. So that does two things. It saves time when you get to your peg, so you haven't got to make a rig on the bank. But it also means that you can have a multitude of different rigs ready for different situations. So, for example, that's one of my winder trays. It's a bit of a mess, but you can see that there's lots of different styles of pole floats on different winders ready to go. So it's just a simple case of getting the loop of line on the top of the rig and attaching it to the elastic, and you're away.
Okay, so if I was, say, fishing on a canal, I could take just the selection of canal winders that I know I'm going to need.
Yep. And the other good thing to mention about these rigs is, particularly for beginners like yourself, new into pole fishing, you can actually buy ready made up rigs. So quite clearly this rig here is designed as a margin rig. You can see it's got a margin float on there. It's got the hook already attached. It's got the shot already in place and a loop in the end of the line. So all you've got to do is attach that to your pole. So I'll just quickly show you what I mean. That's the loop at the top of the rig, and we're using a elastic connector here that very simply traps the loop in place, and there you go. Literally unravel the rig, okay, and you're fishing.
You're ready to roll.
So all you've got to do is plumb the depth, put your bait on, and you're fishing.
Okay, and so then that fits in with what you were saying about having different types of tips set up. You can have everything there. You could have perhaps 2 or 3 different types of setup without getting too complicated.
Yeah.
So you're ready to change as the conditions change or the fish change.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned, I think for beginners, these ready-made rigs that you can buy are very, very effective because it's all done for you. With time, as you get more experience and more knowledgeable, then that's when you start to make up your own rigs for the specific venues that you fish, and you can tailor the rig exactly to how you want to fish.
Okay, certainly for me, I can see me going down and getting a few of these and getting to understand what I'm doing before I even go on to making my own rigs. So this is great. You can get these down at the tackle shop.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic.